The stagecoach lurched to a halt outside the dusty medical office in Coolidge, Arizona, and Faith Holloway knew her life was about to change forever, though she could not have imagined how much. It was June of 1881, and the desert sun beat down mercilessly on the small frontier town nestled in the Gila River Valley. Faith had traveled 3 days from Tucson to see Dr. Morrison, a physician who supposedly had more knowledge about women's ailments than most frontier doctors. Her husband had died 2 years prior during a mining accident, leaving her a widow at 24 with a daughter who had barely reached her second birthday. That daughter, little Emma, had been lost to scarlet fever just 6 months later. The double grief had nearly destroyed Faith, but she had survived by throwing herself into work at her late husband's mercantile store, which she had managed to keep running through sheer determination. But the physical problems had started 3 months ago. The pain, the bleeding that would not stop, the weakness that left her unable to stand some mornings. Her friend Margaret had insisted she see a proper doctor, had even paid for the stagecoach fare. So, here Faith sat, her hands trembling as she waited in the cramped examination room that smelled of carbolic acid and dried herbs. Dr. Morrison was a thin man, with wire-rimmed spectacles and a gentle manner that did nothing to soften the blow of his words. He had examined her thoroughly, asked questions that made her face burn with embarrassment, and then sat across from her with the expression of a man about to deliver a death sentence. "Mrs. Holloway," he began, removing his spectacles to clean them with a handkerchief, "I am afraid the infection you suffered after your daughter's birth did more damage than anyone realized at the time. Combined with the recent complications, your womb has been irreparably harmed." Faith felt the room tilt slightly. "What does that mean, doctor?" "It means you will never bear children again. I am truly sorry." The words hit her like a physical blow. She had already lost one child, had already buried a husband, but somehow the possibility of more children had kept hope alive in her heart, the hope that someday she might rebuild what had been taken from her, that she might hear a baby's cry again and feel tiny fingers wrap around hers. "Are you certain?" Her voice came out barely above a whisper. "I am afraid there is no doubt. The scarring is extensive. I am actually rather concerned about your overall health, Mrs. Holloway. You should not be doing heavy labor or exposing yourself to undue stress. Do you have family who can help you?" Faith shook her head numbly. Her parents had died of cholera during her childhood, and her husband's family had never approved of their marriage. "I run a store. I have to work." Dr. Morrison frowned. "Then I suggest you consider selling it and finding less strenuous employment. Or perhaps remarrying, if you can find a suitable match." The bitter laugh escaped her before she could stop it. "What man would want a wife who cannot give him children, doctor? I might as well be a broken tool." "Now, Mrs. Holloway, do not think that way. You are a young woman still. There are many men who might value you for qualities beyond childbearing." But Faith barely heard him. She paid his fee with money she could not afford to spend, and walked out into the blazing Arizona sunshine, feeling hollowed out, like one of the dried gourds the Mexican women sold at the market. The stagecoach would not leave until morning, so she had secured a room at the boarding house on the edge of town. She walked there slowly, her reticule clutched in her hand, seeing nothing of the dusty street or the people who passed her. The boarding house was run by a widow named Mrs. Chen, a Chinese woman whose husband had worked on the railroad before being killed in an accident. She took one look at Faith's face and asked no questions, simply showed her to a small but clean room and brought her a cup of tea that tasted of jasmine and honey. Faith sat on the narrow bed and finally allowed herself to cry. She cried for Emma, whose blonde curls would never shine in the sunlight again. She cried for her husband James, who had been kind if not passionate, and who had at least given her a home and purpose. She cried for the children she would never hold, the babies who would never exist, the family she would never have. The future stretched before her like the desert outside, barren and endless. She must have fallen asleep eventually because she woke to darkness and the sound of shouting in the street. Faith went to the window and peered out through the thin curtains. A group of men on horseback were riding through town, whooping and firing guns into the air. Cowboys coming in from a cattle drive, most likely, ready to spend their wages on whiskey and cards and women. She watched them disappear toward the saloon district and felt nothing but a distant weariness. The next morning, Faith woke early and packed her few belongings. She had breakfast in the boarding house dining room, forcing down eggs and biscuits that tasted like sand. Mrs. Chen hovered nearby, her dark eyes concerned, but she respected Faith's silence. Other boarders came and went, including 3 cowboys who looked worse for wear after their night of celebration. Faith was checking out, counting coins into Mrs. Chen's weathered palm, when the door burst open and one of the cowboys from the night before stumbled in, his shirt soaked with blood. "Need help," he gasped. "Preston got shot. Need a room." Mrs. Chen took charge immediately, barking orders in a mixture of English and Chinese. 2 other men carried in the injured cowboy, who was semi-conscious and groaning in pain. They laid him on a settee in the parlor, and Mrs. Chen sent one of the boarders running for the doctor. Faith should have left. The stagecoach would be departing soon, but something in the injured man's face made her hesitate. He was young, probably close to her own age, with dark hair and a strong jaw, shadowed with several days' growth of beard. His eyes, when they flickered open, were a startling blue-gray, the color of a sky before a storm. "Madam," he managed, looking directly at Faith, "could trouble you for some water?" She found herself moving forward, kneeling beside him. "Mrs. Chen, do you have water?" The older woman thrust a cup into her hands, and Faith carefully lifted the cowboy's head, helping him drink. His skin was hot with fever, and when she pulled back his blood-soaked shirt to look at the wound, she saw a bullet hole in his left shoulder, still bleeding sluggishly. "What happened?" she asked, pressing a clean cloth Mrs. Chen provided against the wound. "Dispute over cards," one of his companions said. He was a grizzled man, with a scar across his cheek. Other fellow accused Preston of cheating. Preston does not cheat, never has, but the man would not hear it. Drew his gun before Preston could even stand up. "Did you kill him?" Faith asked, surprised by her own bluntness. "No, madam. Preston got his gun out even wounded and shot the pistol right out of the fellow's hand. Most amazing thing I ever saw. Then he collapsed, and we brought him here." Dr. Morrison arrived, red-faced and annoyed at being summoned before he had finished his breakfast. He examined Preston Hawkins, for that was the cowboy's name, and extracted the bullet with practiced efficiency, while Preston bit down on a leather strap and made no sound beyond harsh breathing through his nose. "He'll live if the wound does not go septic," Dr. Morrison announced. "He needs rest, clean bandages changed twice daily, and someone to watch for fever. Can you manage that, Mrs. Chen?" "I can manage," the boarding house keeper said firmly. "I will check on him tomorrow." The doctor packed his bag and departed, leaving instructions and a small bottle of laudanum for the pain. Faith stood to leave, knowing she had already missed the stagecoach. She would have to wait until tomorrow, which meant paying for another night's lodging she could not afford. But Mrs. Chen caught her arm. "You have gentle hands," she said. "Good with hurt people. Stay today. Help me with this cowboy. I give you room free tonight. Yes?" It was a generous offer, and Faith found herself agreeing. She told herself it was just practical, just saving money. It had nothing to do with the way Preston Hawkins had looked at her with those storm-colored eyes, or the fact that helping someone else might keep her from drowning in her own grief. The day passed in a blur of practical tasks. Faith changed Preston's bandages, sponged his forehead when the fever rose, and helped Mrs. Chen prepare meals for the other boarders. Preston drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes lucid and sometimes rambling about cattle and rivers, and a brother named Paul who had died years ago in the war. When evening came and the fever broke, Preston opened his eyes and looked at Faith with full awareness for the first time. "You are an angel," he said, his voice rough but sincere. "Or I died, and I am imagining you." "You are very much alive," Faith replied, wringing out a cloth in the basin beside his makeshift bed. They had moved him to a small room off the kitchen, away from the other boarders. "And I am no angel, I assure you. What is your name?" "Faith Holloway. I'm just helping Mrs. Chen. I was supposed to leave this morning, but it seems fate had other plans." Preston struggled to sit up, and she moved to help him, arranging pillows behind his back. He was shirtless, his shoulder heavily bandaged, and she tried not to notice the muscled planes of his chest or the way his skin felt warm under her fingers. "I am sorry I delayed your journey," he said. "Where are you headed?" "Back to Tucson. I run a store there." "By yourself?" "I am a widow." She said it flatly, not inviting sympathy. Preston nodded, accepting this. "That must be hard work." "It is, but it keeps me occupied." Something in her tone must have warned him not to press further, because he changed the subject. "I do not remember much about getting shot, but I remember you giving me water when we first arrived. You have a kind face." Faith felt heat rise in her cheeks and busied herself tidying the already tidy room. "You should rest, Mr. Hawkins. Dr. Morrison said you need to stay quiet for several days." "Call me Preston, and I will rest if you promise to tell me more about yourself. I find I am very curious about the woman who may have saved my life." "Mrs. Chen and Dr. Morrison saved your life. I just helped a little." "Faith," he said, and the way he said her name made something flutter in her chest. "Please, tell me something. Anything. It is better than lying here staring at the ceiling." So, she sat in the chair beside his bed, and because the day had been long and her defenses were worn thin, she found herself talking. She told him about Tucson, about the store that sold everything from flour to frying pans, about the challenges of managing accounts and inventory and difficult customers. She did not tell him about James or Emma or the doctor's devastating news. Those wounds were too fresh, too raw. Preston listened with genuine interest, asking questions that showed he actually cared about her answers. He told her about his own life, about growing up on a ranch in Texas, about losing his family to a Comanche raid when he was 15, about making his way west and learning the cowboy trade from the ground up. He was 27 now, a trail boss for a cattle operation that moved herds from Texas to the rail yards in Kansas. "It is a hard life," he admitted. "Months on the trail, sleeping on the ground, eating beans and hardtack. But there is something about it that gets in your blood. The open sky, the sense of going somewhere, of being part of something bigger than yourself." "It sounds lonely," Faith said softly. Preston's eyes met hers, and she saw the truth in them. "It is. Very lonely." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, and then Mrs. Chen appeared with a tray of food. Faith stood to leave, but Preston caught her hand. "Will you be here tomorrow?" he asked. "I am leaving on the morning stage. Stay another day, please. I find I heal better when you are near." Faith knew she should refuse. She had a store to run, responsibilities waiting. But something in his eyes, something in the way her hand felt in his, made her hesitate. "I will think about it," she said finally, and his smile made her heart do strange things in her chest. That night, lying in her narrow bed in the room above, Faith stared at the ceiling and tried to make sense of her feelings. She barely knew this man. He was just a cowboy who had been shot in a saloon dispute, someone whose path had crossed hers by pure chance. Tomorrow, she should return to Tucson, to her store, to her empty house and emptier life. But when morning came, she found herself telling Mrs. Chen she would stay another day. And another. She sent a telegram to Margaret, asking her to mind the store for a week, claiming a delay in her return. Margaret, who was a romantic at heart, would understand. Preston healed quickly under Faith's care. By the third day, he was sitting up and eating solid food. By the fifth day, he was walking around the room, testing his strength. They talked for hours about everything and nothing, discovering shared loves of books and thunderstorms and the way the desert smelled after rain. Preston had taught himself to read using dime novels and newspapers, and he was hungry for knowledge about everything. Faith found herself telling him things she had never told anyone, about her dreams of one day traveling to San Francisco, about her love of music even though she had no talent for it, about the way she missed having family. On the seventh day, Preston's friends came to collect him. The cattle drive was moving on, heading north, and Preston needed to rejoin them. He was not fully healed yet, but he insisted he was well enough to ride. Faith helped him pack his few belongings, trying to ignore the leaden feeling in her stomach. Of course he was leaving. He had a job, a life. She had known from the beginning that this was temporary, just a brief intersection of two lonely people thrown together by circumstance. Preston stood in the boarding house parlor, his hat in his hands, looking at her with those storm-gray eyes. His companions waited outside with the horses. "Faith," he said, and then seemed to struggle for words. "I want to thank you for everything. I do not think I would have made it through without you." "You would have been fine," she said, forcing brightness into her voice. "You are strong. The doctor did all the important work." "That is not what I meant." He took a step closer. "Faith, I know we have only known each other a week. I know this is probably foolish, but I feel like I have known you my whole life. Like I was looking for you without even knowing it." Her heart hammered in her chest. "Preston, I do not think... Wait, let me say this." He took a deep breath. "I do not have much to offer. I am just a cowboy, a hired hand, but I am good at what I do, and I save my wages. In a year or two, I will have enough to buy my own land, start my own ranch. I want to build something, Faith, something permanent, and I want to build it with you." Faith felt tears prick her eyes. "You do not know what you are saying. You do not know me, not really. Then tell me. Tell me whatever it is that is making you look at me like your heart is breaking." So she did. Standing in that sun-filled parlor, with dust motes dancing in the air between them, Faith told Preston Hawkins everything. About James and Emma, about the years of grief, about the doctor's diagnosis and the barren future that stretched ahead of her. She told him she was broken, used up, unable to give him the children any man would want. "So you see," she finished, wiping at her tears with the back of her hand, "you should forget about me. Find some young girl who can give you a family, who can give you the future you deserve." Preston stood very still, taking it all in. For a long moment he said nothing, and Faith felt her heart crack open. She had driven him away with the truth, just as she had known she would. Then he closed the distance between them and cupped her face in his hands, his calloused palms rough and warm against her skin. "Faith Holloway," he said, his voice fierce and tender at once, "I do not care. Do you hear me? I do not care about children that might never exist. I care about you. You, standing right here in front of me. You are not broken. You are the strongest, most beautiful woman I have ever met. If we never have children, then we will build a life together anyway. If you want children, we can find other ways, orphans who need homes maybe. But I need you to understand this." He leaned his forehead against hers, his breath warm on her lips. "Then I will love you just as you are, not in spite of what you cannot give me, but because of who you are. All of you, everything you are." Faith felt something break open inside her, something she had kept locked tight since the doctor's awful pronouncement. Hope, fragile and tentative, began to bloom. "You mean that?" she whispered. "I have never meant anything more in my life. But you are leaving. The cattle drive can go on without me. I am the boss. I can leave my second-in-command in charge and catch up with them later. Or I can find new work. Faith, I will do whatever it takes if you will just give me a chance. Give us a chance." She looked up into his face, seeing the absolute sincerity there, and made her decision. "Yes," she breathed. "Yes." Preston kissed her then, gentle and sure, and Faith felt the world shift beneath her feet. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, he was grinning. "I should probably court you properly," he said. "Take you to dinner, walk you home, ask your father's permission." "I have no father," Faith said, smiling through her tears. "And I have already seen you half naked and feverish. I think we are past proper courtship." He laughed, the sound bright and free. "Then, what do you suggest? Come back to Tucson with me. Stay a while. Let us see if what we feel here now can survive in the real world." Preston agreed immediately. He rode out to tell his men he would catch up with them later, or possibly not at all, depending on how things went. His second-in-command, a capable man named Dutch, assured him the drive would be fine. Preston retrieved his wages and his few possessions from the chuck wagon and returned to Coolidge by evening. They left for Tucson the next morning on the stagecoach, sitting side by side with their shoulders touching. Mrs. Chen waved goodbye from the boarding house steps, her face creased in a knowing smile. Faith felt like she was stepping off a cliff into empty air, terrifying and exhilarating at once. Tucson in the summer was even hotter than Coolidge, the sun turning the adobe buildings golden white. Faith's store was on a side street near the Mexican Quarter, a sturdy structure with her late husband's name still painted over the door, Holloway's General Merchandise. Margaret was minding the counter when they arrived, and her eyes widened at the sight of Preston. "Faith Holloway, you have some explaining to do," she said, but she was grinning. Faith introduced Preston, explaining that he would be staying in town for a while, that they were courting. Margaret, who was 40 and motherly, despite never having had children of her own, beamed with approval. She lived above the bakery next door, and had been Faith's closest friend since Faith first arrived in Tucson as a new bride. "There is a room available at the boarding house on 3rd Street, Margaret said. "Run by Mrs. O'Malley, very respectable. I will take you there myself." So, Preston settled into Tucson, and a courtship began that was unlike any Faith had imagined. Preston found work with a rancher outside town, helping to break horses and mend fences. It was not the life he was used to, but he approached it with the same steady determination he brought to everything. In the evenings, he would come to the store as Faith was closing, dusty and tired, and walk her home to the small house she rented 3 streets over. They talked endlessly, discovering each other's histories and habits and hidden dreams. Preston taught Faith to ride properly, taking her out into the desert in the cool of evening, where the saguaros stood like sentinels and the mountains turned purple in the fading light. Faith introduced Preston to books beyond dime novels, loaning him volumes of poetry and history that he devoured with startling speed. "I never had much education," he admitted one evening as they sat on her porch watching the stars emerge. "Left home too young, had to work too hard, but I always wanted to learn more, to understand the world better." "You are one of the smartest people I know," Faith said honestly. "Intelligence is not about schooling. It is about curiosity and the willingness to keep learning." Preston smiled and took her hand, lacing their fingers together. "You make me want to be better. Do you know that? Make me want to build something worth having." They kissed under the desert stars, and Faith felt her old life falling away like a snake's shed skin. She was becoming someone new, someone who could hope again. But happiness brought fear in its wake. Late at night, alone in her bed, Faith would lie awake and worry. What if Preston changed his mind? What if he met some young woman who could give him children and realized what he was giving up? What if the love that felt so real and solid now proved to be just a temporary madness brought on by proximity and circumstance? She shared these fears with Margaret one afternoon as they took inventory in the store. "You are borrowing trouble," Margaret said firmly, counting tins of peaches. "That man looks at you like you hung the moon. I have never seen anything like it. Whatever he said about not caring about children, he meant it." "But how can I be sure?" "Faith, honey, you cannot be sure of anything in this life. Your first husband could have lived to be 90, or he could have died young like he did. Emma could have grown up healthy, or she could have gotten sick. We do not get guarantees. We just get today, and the choice to be brave or to hide." Margaret set down her pencil and looked at Faith directly. "Do not let fear steal your happiness. You have had enough stolen already." The words struck home. Faith thought about them as she walked home that evening, as Preston arrived at her door with a bouquet of wildflowers he had picked on the ride in from the ranch. "They are beautiful," she said, taking the scraggly bunch of desert blooms, poppies and brittlebush, and something purple she did not recognize. "Not as beautiful as you." Preston said it simply, without artifice, and she believed him. "Come inside," Faith said, making a decision. "I want to show you something." She had not let Preston into her house before, always keeping their courtship to public spaces and her front porch. But now she led him into the small parlor with its simple furniture and whitewashed walls. There was a shelf with books and a few treasures, and from this shelf Faith took a small wooden box. Inside was a lock of blonde hair, a tiny knitted booty, and a daguerreotype of a solemn-faced baby with enormous eyes. "This is Emma," Faith said, her voice only slightly unsteady. "This is my daughter." Preston took the photograph carefully, studying it with full attention. "She was beautiful. She has your eyes." "She was just starting to talk when she got sick. She called me Mama, and James was Papa, but she could not quite say her own name. It came out Emmy. That was what we called her." Faith felt the familiar ache in her chest, but it was gentler now, worn smooth by time and tears. "I need you to know that even though I want a future with you, she will always be part of my past. I cannot just forget her. I would never ask you to." Preston set the photograph down gently and pulled Faith into his arms. "She is part of who you are, part of what made you the woman standing in front of me. I am not trying to erase your past, Faith. I just want to be part of your future." Faith buried her face in his shirt, breathing in the scent of him, horse and leather and sage. "I love you," she whispered, the words escaping before she could stop them. "I know it is too soon, but I do. I love you." She felt him stiffen in surprise, and then his arms tightened around her. "Thank God," he said roughly. "Because I have loved you since you gave me water in Mrs. Chen's parlor. I just did not want to scare you off by saying it." They stood there in the gathering darkness, holding each other, and Faith felt something fundamental settle into place. This was right. This was real. Whatever happened, they would face it together. Preston proposed 2 weeks later, going down on one knee in the middle of the desert during one of their evening rides. He had no ring yet, But he had a plan, words tumbling over each other in his eagerness to share them. "I have been saving for years," he said. "I have enough for land. There is a plot for sale south of here, near the river. Good grazing, water rights, room to build. We could start a ranch together, Faith. Run cattle, maybe horses. Build a real home. I know you have the store, but maybe you could sell it or keep it and hire someone to run it while we build the ranch. I do not want you to give up anything. I just want to give you everything I can." Faith looked at this man kneeling in the dust, his face alight with hope and love, and felt a rush of emotion so strong it nearly knocked her breathless. "Yes," she said. "Yes to all of it. Yes to you." Preston surged to his feet and spun her around, both of them laughing like children. When he set her down, he kissed her with a passion that made her knees weak and her heart race. "We should probably get married soon," he said when they finally broke apart, "because I am not sure how much longer I can be proper and gentlemanly about this." Faith blushed but laughed. "Soon then, as soon as we can arrange it." They were married 3 weeks later in the small church on the edge of Tucson, with Margaret as witness and half the town in attendance. Faith wore a simple dress of cream-colored silk that Margaret had helped her sew, and Preston wore a new suit that made him look uncomfortable but devastatingly handsome. The minister was a circuit preacher who happened to be passing through, and he spoke about faith and trust and the blessings of companionship. When Preston slipped the ring on Faith's finger, a simple gold band he had bought with his carefully saved wages, Faith felt tears stream down her face. Happy tears this time, tears of relief and joy and overwhelming gratitude. "I promise to love you for the rest of my days," Preston said, his voice rough with emotion. "In good times and bad, in sickness and health, with children or without. You are my family now, Faith. You are everything I need." "And you are mine," Faith whispered back. "My home, my heart, my future." They kissed as husband and wife, and the small church erupted in applause and cheers. The wedding supper was held at Margaret's bakery, tables set up in the street with food contributed by neighbors. There was roasted chicken and fresh bread, tamales from the Mexican women who lived in Faith's neighborhood, and a wedding cake that Margaret had spent 2 days creating. As the sun set and lanterns were lit, someone brought out a fiddle and impromptu dancing began. Preston pulled Faith into his arms for a waltz, and despite neither of them being particularly skilled dancers, they moved together like they had been doing it for years. Faith rested her head on his chest and listened to the steady thump of his heart beneath his shirt. "Happy?" Preston murmured into her hair. "Happier than I ever thought I could be again." "Good, because I plan to spend the rest of my life making sure you stay that way." They spent their wedding night in Faith's small house, which was now their house. Preston carried her over the threshold despite her laughing protests, and they loved each other with a tenderness and passion that left them both breathless and shaken. Later, lying in the darkness with Faith's head on his shoulder, Preston traced patterns on her bare arm and spoke quietly. "I meant what I said, you know, about children. If we never have any, that is fine. You are enough. You will always be enough." Faith felt fresh tears prick her eyes. "I know you mean it, but I also know you would be a wonderful father, and I am sorry I cannot give you that." "Stop," Preston said firmly, turning to face her. "No more apologies, no more regrets. We have each other, and that is a gift some people spend their whole lives looking for and never find. Let us just be grateful for what we have." So Faith tried. As they began building their new life together, she focused on the present rather than the past or the uncertain future. They bought the land Preston had found, 40 acres along the Santa Cruz River with cottonwood trees and decent grass. The previous owner had started a small adobe house but never finished it, and Preston threw himself into completing the construction. Faith helped, mixing adobe mud and laying bricks, learning to use tools she had never touched before. The work was hard but satisfying. Faith sold the store to a young couple from California, looking to start fresh in the territory, and she used the proceeds to buy cattle and supplies for the ranch. She kept the store's account books, though, her methodical record-keeping proving invaluable as they set up their ranch operation. By October, the house was finished. It was not large or fancy, just 4 rooms with thick walls and small windows to keep out the heat. But it was theirs. They furnished it slowly, buying pieces from estate sales and ordering items from the big catalogs that came through the mail. Faith planted a garden near the house, vegetables and herbs that would tolerate the desert climate. Preston built a corral and a barn, working from dawn to dusk with an energy that seemed inexhaustible. They hired 2 ranch hands, Mexican brothers named Jorge and Carlos, who knew cattle and horses better than anyone Preston had met. The 4 of them worked together to build fences, dig wells, and prepare for the arrival of their first small herd of cattle. The work was demanding and often frustrating, but Preston never complained. He had found what he wanted, a place to put down roots, and he guarded it fiercely. Faith had never been happier. She woke each morning to the sight of Preston's face on the pillow beside her, went to sleep each night wrapped in his arms. They were building something together, something solid and lasting. The ache of childlessness was still there, a dull pain she carried always, but it no longer defined her. She was more than her broken body, more than her grief. She was Preston's wife, a rancher, a woman with purpose and plans. Winter came, milder than the northern winters, but still cold enough for frost on the desert plants. Faith and Preston spent long evenings by the fire, reading aloud to each other, or simply sitting in companionable silence. Preston taught Faith to play poker, and she beat him regularly, much to his mock dismay. She taught him to cook more than just trail food, and they experimented with recipes that sometimes succeeded and sometimes ended in laughter and inedible meals. It was a quiet happiness, the kind that sneaks up on you and makes itself at home. Faith had thought she would never feel this way again after losing Emma and James. She had thought her capacity for joy had been burned out by grief, but Preston had shown her differently. Love did not replace loss, but it could coexist with it, could even grow in the same soil. In February of 1882, Margaret came to visit, riding out from Tucson in a borrowed wagon. She brought news from town and a stack of letters that had arrived at her bakery, most of them seed catalogs and ranch supply advertisements. But one letter was different, addressed to Faith in an unfamiliar hand. Faith opened it curiously while Margaret and Preston caught up on the porch. The letter was from a woman named Sister Mary Catherine at the Tucson Mission Orphanage. Faith had visited the orphanage once before her marriage, bringing a donation from the store's profits, and she had mentioned to the sister in charge that if they ever needed anything, to let her know. The letter explained that the orphanage was overcrowded and underfunded. They had recently taken in several children whose parents had died in a typhoid outbreak, and they were struggling to provide adequate care. Sister Mary Catherine was writing to ask if Faith might consider helping, either with donations or possibly by taking in one of the older children who could work in exchange for room and board. Many ranchers did this, the letter explained, giving orphan children a home in return for labor. Faith read the letter twice, her heart beating faster. She walked out to the porch where Preston and Margaret were talking about rainfall and cattle prices. "Preston, could I speak with you for a moment?" He stood immediately, catching the seriousness in her tone. Margaret tactfully excused herself to admire the garden, and Faith handed Preston the letter. He read it slowly, his expression thoughtful. When he finished, he looked at Faith with those storm-gray eyes. "What are you thinking?" he asked carefully. "I am thinking about what you said, about finding other ways, if we wanted children." Faith's hands twisted together nervously. "I know we have only been married a few months. I know the ranch is just getting started. But Preston, there are children who need homes, children who have lost everything, just like I did, just like you did. Maybe we could help one of them. Maybe we could give them the family they have lost." Preston was quiet for a long moment, and Faith felt her heart sink. It was too soon, she had pushed too hard. He would say no, and she would have to accept it. Then he smiled, that slow, wonderful smile that transformed his whole face. "I think that is a beautiful idea. Let us go to Tucson tomorrow and talk to Sister Mary Catherine." Faith threw her arms around him, overwhelmed with love and gratitude. "Really? You mean it?" "I told you, Faith. I want to build a life with you, and that includes family in whatever form we can create it. If you want to open our home to a child who needs one, then that is what we will do." They rode to Tucson the next day, leaving Jorge and Carlos to mind the ranch. The mission orphanage was on the outskirts of town, a rambling adobe building surrounded by a dusty yard where children of various ages played. Sister Mary Catherine was a small woman with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense manner. She greeted Faith warmly and regarded Preston with cautious assessment. "Many people offer to take children," she said bluntly as they sat in her cramped office. "Some want free labor. Some want someone to care for them in their old age. Some have good intentions, but no understanding of what a child needs. Tell me, Mr. Hawkins, why do you want to do this? Preston did not flinch from her direct stare. My wife and I cannot have children of our own, but we have a home, a ranch that is starting to succeed, and room in our lives for a young person who needs family. I will not lie and say we do not need help on the ranch. Everyone needs help out here, but mostly we want to give a child what we both lost when we were young, a place to belong, people who care, a chance at a future. Sister Mary Catherine studied him for a long moment, then nodded as if satisfied. Come with me. She led them through the orphanage, introducing them to various children. There were babies and toddlers, their faces sticky and clothes worn, but their eyes bright. There were children of 6 and 8 and 10, who watched the visitors with guarded hope. And there were the older ones, the ones less likely to be adopted, who had learned not to hope at all. In a corner of the main room, a boy of about 11 sat reading a battered book. He had dark hair that needed cutting and clothes that were too small for his lanky frame. He did not look up when they approached, seemingly absorbed in his reading. This is Patrick Hill, Sister Mary Catherine said. He has been with us for 2 years. His parents died of typhoid, and he has no other family. He is intelligent, a voracious reader when we can provide him with books. He is also stubborn, temperamental, and prone to getting into fights with the other boys. Patrick finally looked up, his brown eyes wary. I can hear you talking about me, you know. I know, Sister Mary Catherine said calmly. Mr. and Mrs. Hawkins are looking for an older child to come live on their ranch. I thought you might be interested. I am not interested in being anyone's servant, Patrick said flatly. We are not looking for a servant, Faith said gently, kneeling down to his level. We are looking for family, someone to share our home with, to help with the ranch work, but also to be part of our lives, someone who wants to learn and grow and build a future. Patrick stared at her suspiciously. Why would you want me? I am too old for most people. They all want babies. Faith felt tears prick her eyes. Because I lost a child too, a daughter, and I know what it is like to have a hole in your life where family should be. My husband and I want to fill that hole, for us and for someone who needs what we can offer. The boy's expression flickered, something vulnerable showing through the defensive wall he had built around himself. What kind of work would I have to do? Preston spoke up. Ranch work, mending fences, tending cattle, helping with horses, learning to rope and ride properly. It is hard work, but I will teach you everything I know. And in the evenings, we will make time for schooling. My wife is educated, and she can teach you reading and writing and arithmetic. If you want to learn a trade beyond ranching, we can help with that too when you are older. And if I do not work hard enough, Patrick asked, his voice tight. What then? Do you beat me and send me back? No, Preston said firmly. If you do not work hard enough, we talk about it and figure out why and how to do better. That is what families do. They work things out together. Patrick looked between them, clearly wanting to believe, but afraid to let himself. Faith reached out and gently touched the book in his lap. What are you reading? Tom Sawyer. I have read it 3 times already, but we do not have many books here. We have lots of books at our ranch, Faith said, and we can get more from town. You can read as much as you want. That seemed to be the tipping point. Patrick's eyes widened. Really? Really? Sister Mary Catherine gave them a week to think it over and arrange the paperwork. They returned to the ranch, talking late into the night about whether they were ready, whether they could do this, whether it was fair to the boy to bring him into their lives. What if we are not good enough? Faith worried. What if we fail him? What if we succeed? Preston countered. What if we give him exactly what he needs? Faith, we are not perfect, but we are willing to try. That is more than a lot of people can say. So, they went back to Tucson the following week and signed the papers that made them Patrick Hill's legal guardians. Sister Mary Catherine blessed them and warned them that it would be challenging, that Patrick had been through trauma and loss and would not easily trust them. But he is a good boy underneath the anger, she said. Give him time and patience, and I think you will find he has much to offer. They brought Patrick home on a warm day in March. He rode in the wagon between them, his meager possessions in a small sack, his expression carefully blank. When they arrived at the ranch and he saw the house and the land stretching away toward the mountains, something in his face softened. This is all yours? He asked. Ours, Faith corrected gently. It belongs to all of us now. They showed him the small bedroom they had prepared, with a real bed and a trunk for his clothes and a shelf for books. Patrick stood in the doorway, staring at the space like he could not quite believe it was his. "You can decorate it however you like," Preston said. "Make it your own." Patrick just nodded, not trusting his voice. The first weeks were challenging. Patrick was not accustomed to family life, to people who cared what he thought and felt. He was defensive, quick to anger, convinced they would send him back at the first sign of trouble. He tested boundaries constantly, refusing to do chores or talking back, or deliberately breaking things to see what would happen. Faith and Preston met each challenge with patience and consistency. When Patrick refused to do his chores, Preston explained calmly that the ranch only worked if everyone did their part, and then showed Patrick how to do the tasks properly. When Patrick lashed out in anger, Faith gave him space to cool down, and then talked with him about what was really bothering him. When Patrick broke a plate in what seemed like deliberate defiance, Preston simply showed him how to clean it up and said they would be more careful in the future. Slowly, Patrick began to believe that he was not going to be sent back, that this was real. He started participating in ranch work, and it turned out he had a natural affinity for animals. The horses responded to him, and even the most skittish cattle seemed to calm when Patrick was around. Preston taught him to rope and ride, and Patrick absorbed the lessons with fierce concentration. In the evenings, Faith taught him reading and arithmetic and history. Patrick was hungry for knowledge, asking endless questions, devouring every book Faith could provide. He was particularly fascinated by books about explorers and inventors, people who had changed the world through determination and ingenuity. One night, about 2 months after Patrick arrived, Faith was putting away dishes when she heard voices from the porch. Patrick and Preston were sitting outside, looking at the stars. She moved closer to the window, not eavesdropping exactly, just listening. "Do you think about your parents?" Patrick was asking. "Every day," Preston said quietly. "Even after all these years, they were good people. They deserve better than what happened to them. Mine too. I am starting to forget what my mother's voice sounded like. That scares me. That is normal. The memories fade, but the love does not. They are still part of you, Patrick. Always will be." There was a long pause, and then Patrick spoke again, his voice very small. "Do you think they would be okay with me being here? With me having a new family? I think they would want you to be happy and safe. I think they would be glad you found people who care about you." Preston paused, then added, "And Patrick, we do care. This is not just a business arrangement. You matter to us. You are family now, whether you like it or not." Faith heard a sound that might have been a laugh or might have been a sob. "I think I might like it," Patrick said. "Being family." Faith turned away from the window, wiping tears from her cheeks. Preston found her later, sitting on their bed with her face in her hands. "What is wrong?" he asked, immediately concerned. "Nothing is wrong. Everything is right." Faith looked up at him, her eyes shining. "I heard you talking with Patrick. Preston, we are doing it. We are giving him a home, a real home, and he is giving us purpose, giving us the family we thought we could never have." Preston sat beside her and pulled her close. "You were right to want this. I am glad we took the chance." By summer, Patrick had fully integrated into their lives. He called them Mr. Hawkins and Mrs. Hawkins still, not ready for anything more familiar, but there was affection in how he said it. He worked hard on the ranch, taking pride in his growing skills. He was learning to read and write with increasing sophistication, and Faith began teaching him basic bookkeeping so he could help with the ranch accounts. The ranch itself was prospering. They had increased their herd and were selling cattle at good prices. Preston's reputation as an honest dealer spread, and they began getting offers to buy more land to expand operations. But Preston was cautious, wanting to build slowly and sustainably. "I have seen too many men try to grow too fast and lose everything," he told Faith. "We will build this right, one step at a time." In August, Faith realized her monthly courses were late. At first, she dismissed it as stress or the heat, but when another week passed and then another, she began to wonder. But she did not dare hope, did not dare even think about what it might mean. Dr. Morrison had been so certain, so absolute in his diagnosis. 2 months after her courses stopped, Faith finally admitted to herself that something was different. Her breasts were tender, her sense of smell heightened, and she felt tired in a way that had nothing to do with ranch work. She was terrified to hope, terrified to tell Preston and see disappointment in his eyes when it turned out to be nothing. But she had to know. So she made an appointment with a new doctor in Tucson, Dr. Sarah Williams, one of the few female physicians in the territory. Faith told Preston she was going to town to order supplies, and she rode in alone on a cool September morning. Dr. Williams was a practical woman in her 40s with kind eyes and capable hands. She examined Faith thoroughly, asked detailed questions, and then sat back with an expression of wonder. "Mrs. Hawkins, unless I am very much mistaken, you are with child, about 3 months along, I would estimate." Faith felt the world tilt. "That is not possible. I was told I could never have children. The damage was too severe." "Who told you that?" "Dr. Morrison in Coolidge. After I had complications, he said my womb was irreparably harmed." "Doctor." Williams frowned. "I cannot speak to what Dr. Morrison saw or believed he saw, but I can tell you what I am finding now. You are pregnant, Mrs. Hawkins. Your womb is enlarged, your cervix has the right color and texture, and I can feel what is almost certainly a baby. Bodies are remarkable things. They heal in ways we do not always expect or understand. It is possible that the scarring Dr. Morrison observed has somehow resolved, or that it was not as extensive as he believed, or perhaps this is simply one of those medical mysteries we cannot fully explain." Faith put a hand to her stomach, feeling nothing yet, but knowing something was there. A baby. A child she had been told was impossible. "Are you certain?" she whispered. "As certain as I can be without waiting for the baby to arrive. But yes, Mrs. Hawkins, I am very certain." Faith rode home in a daze, her mind reeling. Part of her was terrified, remembering the pain and loss of Emma. What if something went wrong? What if this baby did not survive? What if she could not carry to term? But beneath the fear was a joy so intense it threatened to overwhelm her. Against all odds, impossibly, miraculously, she was going to have a baby. Preston was in the barn when she arrived, showing Patrick how to repair a saddle. Faith stood in the doorway, watching them work together, this man she loved and this boy they had taken in, and felt her heart swell with almost painful intensity. "Patrick, could you go help Jorge with the fence repairs?" she asked, keeping her voice steady. "I need to speak with Mr. Hawkins for a moment." Patrick looked between them curiously but nodded and headed out. Preston set down the saddle and came to Faith, concern creasing his forehead. "What is wrong? Did something happen in town?" "Preston, I need to tell you something. I do not know how this is possible, and I am terrified it might not be real, but I went to see a doctor today. A different doctor, not Dr. Morrison." "Why? Are you ill?" "No, Preston, I am pregnant." He stared at her like she had spoken in a foreign language. "What?" "I am with child. About 3 months along. I do not understand how, given what Dr. Morrison said, but Dr. Williams was very certain. I am going to have a baby." Preston's face went through a series of expressions, shock and disbelief and hope and fear, before settling on wonder. "A baby? Our baby? Our baby." He let out a sound somewhere between a laugh and a sob and pulled her into his arms, holding her like she might disappear if he let go. "Faith, my God, Faith, are you sure? Is it safe? Are you going to be all right?" "Dr. Williams says yes. She says I am healthy. The baby seems strong. She wants to monitor me closely given my history, but she sees no reason to think I cannot carry to term." Preston pulled back to look at her face, his eyes wet with tears. "I thought I was already the luckiest man alive. But this, Faith, this is beyond anything I could have imagined. You are not disappointed?" The question escaped before she could stop it. "I know you said you did not need children, that I was enough. I do not want you to feel like you had to say that, or that this somehow makes me more valuable." "Stop," Preston said, cupping her face in his hands. "Listen to me. You were enough before, and you are enough now. This baby is not a blessing because it makes you whole or fixes something broken. You were never broken. This baby is a blessing because it is a gift we never expected, a miracle we did not dare hope for. But Faith, even if this pregnancy does not last, even if something goes wrong, you are still everything to me. Do you understand?" Faith nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I understand. And I love you. I love you so much." They told Patrick that evening over dinner. The boy looked confused at first, then calculating. "So you will have your own child now. Does that mean you will not want me anymore?" "Absolutely not," Preston said firmly. "Patrick, you are our family. That does not change because we are having a baby. There is room in our hearts and our home for more than one child." "But will not the baby be different?" Patrick persisted. "Your real child, not just someone you took in?" Faith reached across the table and took his hand. "Patrick Hill, you listen to me. You are our real child. Real does not mean blood. Real means love and commitment and showing up every day. We chose you, and we are choosing you again every single day. This baby will be your brother or sister, not your replacement. Do you understand?" Patrick nodded slowly, and Faith saw the relief in his eyes. "Okay, I guess having a baby around might be all right, as long as I do not have to change diapers too often." They all laughed, and the tension broke. Over the following weeks, Patrick surprised them by becoming fiercely protective of Faith. He insisted on doing heavier chores so she would not strain herself, and he checked on her constantly to make sure she was resting enough. It was endearing and slightly overwhelming. "He is going to make a good big brother," Preston observed one evening as they watched Patrick carefully carry firewood into the house, refusing to let Faith lift a single log. "He is going to drive me mad with worry if he keeps this up," Faith said, but she was smiling. The pregnancy progressed smoothly through fall and into winter. Faith's body, which had been told it could not do this, seemed determined to prove everyone wrong. The baby grew steadily, and by December, Faith could feel distinct kicks and rolls. She would lie in bed at night with Preston's hand on her belly, both of them marveling at the life moving inside her. "What should we name the baby?" Preston asked one night. "If it is a boy, I was thinking about James, after my first husband. He would have wanted me to be happy, I think. He would have liked you. And if it is a girl?" Faith was quiet for a moment. "Not Emma. I thought maybe so at first, but no. Emma was Emma, and this baby deserves her own name. Something about new beginnings, maybe. Hope, Grace." "I like Grace," Preston said. "Grace Hawkins." Dr. Williams came to the ranch regularly as Faith's due date approached, wanting to be cautious, given the history. She pronounced everything normal and healthy and predicted the baby would arrive sometime in March. "You have done well, Mrs. Hawkins," she said. "Whatever happened in the past, your body has healed remarkably. This baby is strong and well-positioned. I see no reason for complications." Faith wanted to believe her, but as March arrived and her belly grew impossibly large, fear began to creep in. What if something went wrong during labor? What if she lost this baby like she had lost Emma? What if the miracle proved to be an illusion? Preston seemed to sense her growing anxiety. He took to sleeping with one arm wrapped protectively around her, and he stayed close to the house even when there was work to be done elsewhere on the ranch. "I am not going to lose you," he said fiercely when she tried to express her fears. "You are strong, and so is our baby. You are both going to be fine." The baby came on a warm day in mid-March, 3 weeks after Faith's estimated due date. The labor started just after dawn, and by mid-morning, the pains were coming regularly. Preston sent Patrick to fetch Dr. Williams from town, and then he stayed by Faith's side, holding her hand and murmuring encouragement as the contractions intensified. Dr. Williams arrived by early afternoon and took charge with brisk efficiency. The labor was long and hard, lasting well into the night, and there were moments when Faith thought she could not go on. But Preston never left her side, and Dr. Williams guided her through each stage with patient expertise. Finally, in the early hours of the morning, with the stars still bright outside, Faith gave one last tremendous push and felt the baby slide free. The infant's cry filled the room, lusty and strong, and Faith collapsed back against the pillows, exhausted and euphoric. "It is a boy," Dr. Williams announced, placing the squalling bundle on Faith's chest. "A healthy, perfect boy." Faith looked down at her son, this impossible miracle, and felt love slam into her with physical force. He had dark hair like Preston and blue eyes that might change or might stay. His face was red and wrinkled and absolutely beautiful. Preston leaned over them both, his face wet with tears, and kissed Faith's forehead and then the baby's. "James," Faith whispered. "James Preston Hawkins." "Hello, James," Preston said, his voice rough with emotion. "Welcome to the family." They named him James, but from the beginning he was called Jamie. Patrick, allowed into the room once Faith had rested and cleaned up, stared at the baby with wonder. "He is so small," he said, awed. "Was I ever that small?" "You were," Faith assured him. "And you will help us take care of him, will you not?" "I guess so," Patrick said, trying to sound reluctant, but unable to hide his smile when Jamie wrapped tiny fingers around Patrick's much larger one. The ranch hummed with new life that spring. Jamie thrived, growing plump and healthy, his cries filling the house at all hours. Faith recovered quickly from the birth, and Dr. Williams pronounced her completely healthy. Preston was besotted with his son, spending hours just watching him sleep or making silly faces to coax out toothless smiles. Patrick proved surprisingly helpful, fetching diapers and rocking the cradle when Jamie fussed, taking his role as big brother with endearing seriousness. "I am reading to him," Patrick explained one afternoon when Faith found him with the baby. "Dr. Williams said you were supposed to talk to babies, help their minds develop, so I am reading him Tom Sawyer. He is 2 months old, Patrick. He cannot understand the story. He likes the sound of my voice, though. See?" He stopped fussing. Faith smiled and left them to it, marveling at how their family had grown and changed. A year ago, she had been alone and barren, convinced her future held nothing but loneliness and loss. Now she had a husband who adored her, a son who should not exist, and an adopted child who was blooming under their care. It was more than she had dreamed possible. Summer arrived with its brutal heat, but the ranch was doing well. They had expanded their herd and hired 2 more hands to help with the increased work. Preston was talking about building additions to the house, more bedrooms for their growing family. Faith, nursing Jamie while reviewing the account books, felt contentment settle over her like a warm blanket. One evening in August, as the family sat on the porch watching the sunset, Patrick spoke up suddenly. "Can I call you Ma and Pa?" he asked, looking at his lap. "I mean, if you do not want me to, that is fine. But I was thinking, since Jamie is going to call you that when he gets older, maybe I could too, since we are family and all." Faith felt her throat tighten with emotion. "Patrick, we would be honored if you called us that." Preston nodded, his own eyes suspiciously bright. "More than honored, son." Patrick looked up, a slow smile spreading across his face at the word son. "Okay then. Thanks, Pa. Thanks, Ma." That night, after the boys were in bed, Preston and Faith lay together in the darkness, talking quietly about everything and nothing. "Did you ever imagine this?" Faith asked. "When you were lying shot in Mrs. Chen's boarding house, did you think your life would turn out like this?" "I imagined you," Preston said honestly. "From the moment you gave me that cup of water, I imagined a future with you in it. But this, all of this, it is better than anything I could have dreamed up. You gave me everything, Faith. A home, a family, a purpose beyond just surviving." "We gave it to each other," Faith corrected. "You saved me just as much as I saved you, maybe more. I was drowning in grief and emptiness, and you threw me a lifeline. You loved me when I thought I was unlovable. You saw value in me when I could not see it in myself." Preston kissed her, slow and sweet. "Then I'll love you just as you are. That is what I said, is it not? You did, and you kept that promise. Even when the miracle happened and we got Jamie, you never made me feel like I was only valuable because I could give you a child. That is because it is true. You were always valuable, always worthy. The miracle was not Jamie, Faith. The miracle was finding you." They held each other in the darkness, listening to the desert night sounds filtering through the window. Somewhere in the house, Jamie made a small sound and then settled back to sleep. In the room across the hall, Patrick was dreaming whatever dreams 12-year-old boys have. Outside, the ranch stretched away under starlight, land they had worked and bled for, land that was truly theirs. Faith thought about the long journey that had brought her here, the losses and grief, the devastation of being told she would never have children, the desperate loneliness that had nearly consumed her. Then the stagecoach stopping in Coolidge, a cowboy with storm-gray eyes who had been shot defending his honor, and words that had changed everything. "Then I will love you just as you are." She had been so certain she was broken, used up, worthless. But Preston had seen her differently. He had seen strength and beauty and worth, had loved her not despite her perceived brokenness, but because of the whole person she was. He had given her permission to hope again, to believe she deserved happiness, to imagine a future that held more than just survival. And against all odds, impossibly, miraculously, that future had arrived. They had built it together, brick by brick, day by day, through hard work and faith and love that refused to give up. They had taken in a boy who needed them and been blessed with a baby they never expected. They had created a family from grief and loss and determination, proving that love could indeed grow in even the most barren soil. "What are you thinking?" Preston murmured, his breath warm against her hair. "I am thinking that I am grateful for all of it, even the hard parts, because they led me here to you, to this life, to this family. I am thinking that sometimes the best things in life are the ones you never saw coming. I love you, Faith Hawkins. I love you too, Preston Hawkins, for the rest of my days and beyond." The years that followed were full and rich. Jamie grew from baby to toddler to boy, bright and curious and full of laughter. Patrick became a man, learning ranching from the ground up, and eventually taking over much of the day-to-day operation as Preston focused on business expansion. When Patrick turned 18, Preston legally adopted him, making him fully and officially a Hawkins. Faith had 2 more children, daughters who were born without complication in 1884 and 1886. Much to everyone's amazement, including Dr. Williams, the girls, named Grace and Clara, completed their family. The house grew to accommodate them all, expanding from 4 rooms to 8, with a wide porch that wrapped around 3 sides. The ranch prospered, becoming one of the most successful operations in southern Arizona. But Preston never forgot his roots or the people who had helped them along the way. They hired Jorge and Carlos as full partners, sharing profits and decision-making. They donated regularly to Sister Mary Catherine's orphanage and took in 2 more children over the years, giving homes to young people who needed second chances. Faith continued her education pursuits, teaching not just her own children, but starting a small school on the ranch for the children of their workers and neighbors. She discovered a talent for teaching and a passion for ensuring that every child, regardless of background, had access to learning. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Preston took Faith back to Coolidge to visit Mrs. Chen's boarding house. The old woman was still there, a bit grayer but still spry and sharp-eyed. She took one look at them and laughed with delight. "I knew," she said triumphantly. "When I saw you with that hurt cowboy, I knew you were meant for each other. You had the look of 2 people who belonged together." They spent the night at the boarding house, in the same room where Faith had once cried herself to sleep, believing her future held nothing but emptiness. Now, lying in Preston's arms in that narrow bed, she marveled at how completely wrong she had been. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked. "Taking on a ready-made family, all the responsibility and work?" Preston laughed quietly. "Not for a single second. Faith, you gave me everything I did not even know I wanted. Purpose, family, love, a place to call home. I spent years drifting, never putting down roots, never letting myself care too much about anything, because it was easier than risking loss. Then I got shot in a saloon dispute and woke up to find an angel giving me water, and everything changed. I was no angel. You were to me. You still are. You took a broken cowboy and loved him back to life, then built a family and a legacy that will outlast us both. Our children will have children, Faith. This thing we created will go on and on. That is the real miracle, not just Jamie or the girls, but all of it. The whole beautiful, impossible, wonderful life we built together." Faith kissed him in the darkness of that small room where so much had begun, and she felt the circle of their story complete itself. From grief to hope, from loneliness to love, from barren to blessed. It had not been easy, and it had not been what she expected, but it had been absolutely perfectly right. They returned to the ranch the next day, where their children waited with hugs and stories about everything that had happened in their absence. Patrick had managed the ranch flawlessly. Jamie had apparently tried to ride a particularly stubborn horse and ended up in the water trough, and the girls had convinced their teacher to let them have a picnic instead of arithmetic lessons. Life went on in its beautiful, chaotic way. The ranch continued to grow and thrive, becoming a fixture in the territory. When Arizona achieved statehood in 1912, the Hawkins Ranch was featured in newspapers as an example of frontier success and family values. Preston and Faith, now in their 50s with grown children and grandchildren starting to arrive, were asked to speak at community events about their journey. Faith always told the truth in those speeches. She talked about loss and grief, about being told she would never have children, about the despair that had nearly consumed her. And then she talked about a cowboy who had looked at her with storm-gray eyes and said words that changed everything. "Then I will love you just as you are." That is the real story, she would say to crowds of listeners. Not that I miraculously had children after all, though that certainly happened. The real story is that I learned I was valuable whether I had children or not, that my worth was not dependent on what I could produce or provide, but on who I was as a person. My husband taught me that. He loved me when I was broken, when I had nothing to offer but grief and scars, and that love healed me in ways no medicine ever could. It gave me permission to hope again, to believe in possibilities. It is true, we were blessed with children eventually. But even without them, our life would have been rich and full and meaningful, because it was built on real love, the kind that sees you completely and chooses you anyway. Preston would always add his own perspective. I told Faith I would love her just as she was, and I meant it. But what I did not understand then was how much she would change me. She took a drifting cowboy with no roots and no future, and gave him everything. She taught me that family is not just about blood, it is about choice. We chose each other, we chose our children, and every single day we choose to keep building this life together. That is love. Not the easy emotion of early infatuation, but the hard daily work of commitment and partnership, and showing up even when it is difficult. Faith showed me what it means to love completely, and I am grateful for every single day I get to spend with her. They grew old together, Preston and Faith, their hair turning gray and then white, their bodies slowing, but their love never diminishing. They watched their children grow and marry and have children of their own. Patrick took over the ranch completely, running it with the same careful stewardship Preston had taught him. Jamie became a teacher like his mother, running the ranch school and expanding it into a proper building that served the whole county. Grace married a doctor and moved to Phoenix, while Clara shocked everyone by becoming a lawyer, one of the first women to practice law in Arizona. The ranch remained the center of everything, the place where family gathered for holidays and celebrations, where grandchildren ran wild through the same fields their parents had explored, where stories were told and retold until they became legend. The story of how Preston and Faith met, of the impossible love that had blossomed in a boarding house in Coolidge, of the family they had built from nothing, was passed down through generations. When Preston died peacefully in his sleep at the age of 73, Faith held his hand and whispered all the things she had told him 1,000 times before. How much she loved him, how grateful she was for every moment they had shared, how he had saved her in every way a person could be saved. Faith lived 3 more years, surrounded by children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, a matriarch of a family that had grown beyond anything she could have imagined that day in Dr. Morrison's office when she learned she would never bear children. When she passed quietly one spring morning, with the desert flowers blooming outside her window, her family gathered to celebrate a life fully and beautifully lived. They buried her next to Preston on a hill overlooking the ranch, under a sky so blue and vast it seemed to go on forever. The headstone was simple, listing her name and dates and a single line that Preston had requested years before, knowing it captured everything that mattered. She was loved just as she was, and she loved in return, and that made all the difference. And it had. Against all odds, despite every obstacle, through grief and loss and impossible diagnoses, love had prevailed. Faith Holloway Hawkins had been told she would never bear children again, and a cowboy had said, "Then I will love you just as you are." From that moment, from that promise, an entire world had bloomed. Children and grandchildren, a ranch that spanned thousands of acres, a legacy of love that would continue for generations. It was more than a miracle. It was proof that sometimes the best things in life come from the most unexpected places, that love really can heal the deepest wounds, and that family is not about blood or biology, but about the connections we choose to forge with open hearts and determined spirits. Faith and Preston had chosen each other, had chosen their children, had chosen to believe in possibilities even when the world said there were none. And they had lived happily ever after, not because their life was perfect or easy, but because they faced every challenge together with love and commitment and the unshakable belief that they were meant to be exactly where they were, with exactly who they had, building exactly the life they were meant to live. In the end, that was the greatest miracle of all.